I'm Alicia, Jali. A very good morning and welcome to Media Monitor. Now, before we get started with the weekly news review, here's a quick look at the top stories. A stunned Springbok camp has a week to regroup after their shocking defeat to Japan in the box opening match of the Rugby World Cup. We will discuss the story later in detail during our newspaper analysis. The Coalition Against Corruption says it wants the National Treasury to name and shame all state entities involved in tender irregularities. Now, this will be one of its demands when it holds a march on the 30th of this month. Pope Francis has urged Cuba and the United States to continue working towards improving their relations. He was speaking at the airport in Havana at the start of a visit to both countries. Radio News is currently leading with the following headlines this hour. The ANC's announcement that it plans to remove criminal defamation from the country's laws has been widely hailed as a massive boost to freedom of speech. U.S. presidential hopeful Donald Trump has hit back at those who criticize him for failing to correct a supporter who said President Barack Obama was a Muslim and not even an American. Well, the Rugby World Cup has exploded into life after Japan produced one of the greatest sporting upsets of all time, beating the two-time champion South Africa with the last move of the match. The Springboks' defeat went viral on social media. Let's take a look at some of the reactions. BG said sad-looking #Springbok supporters drown their sorrows after their loss to #Japan. Unfortunately, we can't access that picture on Instagram, but I would have loved to see it nevertheless. Loazisto says, so why is #Figilembalula not strongly condemning the disgraceful #Springbok performance as he freely does with Bafana Bafana? Now, giving us a sense of today's newspaper headlines and stories of the week is political analyst Professor Stephen Friedman, as well as our very own SABC senior reporter, Mr. Aldrin Sampear. We'd like to hear your views on the stories this morning, gentlemen. A very good morning to both of you. Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
Thank you for
Unfortunately, it's after a heartbreaking day, but gentlemen, let's have a look at what's making news at front pages this morning. The Sunday Times is leading with a story there about the shocking Springboks loss at the hands of Japan. The former world champions' defeat has been described as the first in the history of rugby. The Sunday Independent there has a story about the illegal detention of Congolese men, allegedly by some members of the Hawks unit. It is reported that the Hawks has been operating a rogue unit that is involved in a former apartheid Flak Plus type operations. The Weekend Argus has a story about SARS and the Hawks and the intelligence services that is going to investigate the amount of 78 million rand that was confiscated at the OR Tambo International Airport. The Sunday Tribune is leading with the same story as the Sunday Times. Springboks' poor performance against Japan. News outside our borders now. Nigeria's Daily Trust. The front page story is about the trial of Bukola Saraki over allegedly failing to declare his assets in 2003 and 2011. All right, gentlemen, let's start with the Sunday Times. Now, the Sunday Times is a very nice story, sadly. Box heads roll. Now, the shocking defeat of Japan has apparently exposed Heineken Mayor's old man game plan tactics, with a serious cloud of doubt now hanging over his capability as head coach. Now, look, Twitter went absolutely on the rampage yesterday, talking about how the untransformed team was the cause of that loss. Gentlemen, I want to hear your views. Let's start with you, Aldrin.
You see, the sad thing about any type of sport, especially when it's a team sport, is that whenever there's a defeat, somebody feels that the coach's head should roll immediately just because of that one defeat. And I like what the minister said on Twitter is that, you know what, let's all remain behind the box, because what you want to do as the World Cup starts is that you don't want to create a situation where you have the team morale very, very low ahead of other games that they're still supposed to play in those pool matches coming up.
Look, it wasn't such a bad defeat, 32-34. Professor?
I think in footballing terms, that would be a bit like if Kaiser Chiefs lost to the local pub team 1-0 and you said it was only 1-0. I think it's that kind of... No, let me say, I'm not a rugby fan. I really think sport ought to be played with a round ball. But it's very interesting to me what this is going to say about race relations in South Africa and racial politics in South Africa. I think a couple of points will immediately be made. The first point will be made that we used to have a black coach of the national rugby team, which everybody in the media made fun of, and he was made an absolute... He was given an incredibly hard time. He never lost to Japan. Yeah. they lost to Argentina the other day. He never lost to Argentina. So the question will be asked, are we really talking about competence here, or are we talking about, you know, what the colour of your skin is? And then obviously, as you're seeing, there will be questions asked about the racial composition of the team once again. Many black rugby fans feel that we're not playing the best team. We're playing the team that white prejudices feel is the best team. And that will come up as well. The politician, as we've already seen, who will have to bear some of the heat is the sports minister who's backed the team. And we're already seeing that some people say, well, you know, why are you backing a team which is not representative of the country and doesn't do very well? So I think we're going to see some very interesting racial politics around this.
This issue has totally divided people. Hey, Aldrin?
It actually has. And if you look at the Sunday Times report, they actually go into detail with regards to the representation of black players in the team. Heineke Meyer made a commitment that there'll be 30% of the entire team will be black players. However, what they found is that it came 3% short of that 30%. And those are the type of things that people will really be looking into. And I remember when this question around the transformation of the World Cup team came into discussion, Beeld actually had a big spread where they compared Heineke Meyer and his predecessor and said if you look at the two, you'd find that Heineke Meyer has had more black players compared to de Villiers.
Very interesting indeed. Well, let's continue on now on the Sunday Times on page 4. It says, VIP guards expose abusive ministers. Very interestingly, shocking revelation by number of VIP Protection Unit members who claim the behavior of some of the high-profile politicians they guard is downright shocking. Among their claims is that they are sometimes ordered to do things like leaving nightclubs early in the morning, drive at excessive speed, and even being glorified nannies to some. Now, they say that they've tried to raise these issues even before the death of Minister Chabane and his bodyguards, and claims are that they're scared to raise these issues because they might lose their jobs. Gentlemen.
Just two quick issues here. The first one is that actually yesterday I had a discussion or a phone call with a certain person who works with a certain minister, and we were actually speaking about this and how she'd have to go down into the minister's purse to just get a piece of toilet paper while the minister's sitting right next to her and the handbag is right next to the minister. But she, as an assistant, had to go down in that bag and get that piece of toilet paper. And that's the type of thing that they've been experiencing. If you go through a certain deputy minister's Twitter account or Instagram account, you'll see pictures where he's actually walking and his protectors are following him with his bags, holding his bags as well.
My goodness. Professor?
Look, I think there's a, you know, that is scandalous, but I think there's an important issue here. And the important issue here is VIP protection people, who are they? Who do they actually work for? And I think the ministers seem to think, or some of the ministers seem to think, that they're the personal property of the ministers. They're not the personal property of the ministers. They work for the South African public. Yep. Yes. They're supposed to protect ministers of state from physical harm. They are not batmen or batwomen. They are not personal skivvies. They are not supposed to rush around and do your personal stuff for you. They are supposed to protect you because it's considered important to protect our public officials. And I think that the beginning of the answer to this problem is to make it very clear that these VIP guards work for the South African public. They do not work for individual ministers, and therefore anything they're asked to do above and beyond protecting the security of the minister, they should simply be able to say no. It's not what I'm paid to do.
Most definitely. And one of the protectors who spoke to the Sunday Times, obviously, and anonymity, said that at some point while they were doing shopping, they expected to push the trolley. You'd be pushing a trolley, and at a point where the minister gets attacked or something like that, how do you protect that person when that person is under attack while you're pushing the trolley?
You see, it's a sort of arrogance among certain politicians which assumes that, you know, really everything is there for their benefit rather than for the public's benefit. So I think this is, you know, it's a small story in a sense, but it's a big story in the sense that it betrays a certain attitude to the South African public.
But why haven't unions said anything? Because then I think people would know where they're supposed to, their line of reporting in terms of, you know, what to say when these people are actually forcing you to do stuff that you're not supposed to be doing.
But you see, that's the thing, is that how many ministers do we have? And you would know immediately when there's a complaint against the minister. You'd know who that complaint came from, for instance. And that's what you're seeing in this report as well. And that's the reason why some of these people are speaking under anonymity, because they feel that there will be that reprisal if they go public or if they go to the unions. At some point, eventually, it will backfire. And as that guy said in one of these, it's in the Sunday Times, said that he fears that he might lose his job, for instance, if he goes that route.
Yeah, that is a concern.
All right, let's move on now and have a look at page 5. And it says, watchdog sniffs around jet-set pastors' children. Very interesting indeed here. It says SA pastors leading a vibrant life in the Rhema Church in London, and their trustees are allegedly under investigation by the UK authorities, who want to know how they spent the church's 5.7 million rand. Now, it's becoming common to read about church corruption these days. What's going on here, Professor?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure what the British authorities have in mind. I mean, if churches are, if pastors are spending money that belong to their congregants, I suppose you might have a fraud charge against them. You know, but it's very difficult to prove. I mean, if they haven't paid their taxes or something like that, then you've got a strong case. But you see, the problem with a lot of these charismatic churches is that you know, people don't belong to charismatic churches unless they have a totally uncritical attitude to the pastor.
Yes, that's true.
So what very often happens is, well, the pastor says, yes, well, of course I'm living this lifestyle. It's not incidentally a purely South African thing.
Yeah.
You get it in America quite often. And then the members of the church say, yes, but this is what we want, because it shows that we respect him and it shows that he's honoured, etc. So I think that it's good that the authorities are acting wherever they are, but they're going to have a tough time proving this, because you see, the people who are being defrauded are not the general public. The people who are being defrauded are the members of the church. And if the members of the church hero worship the person who's defrauding them, it's very difficult to actually make a charge stick.
Aldrin, you can say more after the break. And when we return, we're going to continue with today's newspaper headlines analysis. Do stay with us.
Sabc brings to you Rugby World Cup 2015.
Fellow comrades paying their last respects. A husband, father and struggle veteran, Reggie van der Jaar was described as larger than life.
He was an exuberant personality. He loved life. He enjoyed taking part in the struggle for democracy in this country. A very comradely figure, a very fatherly figure.
Van der Jaar, a former member of the Communist Party and Transvaal Indian Congress, joined Umkhonto weSizwe in 1963. He was among the first group of Indian Congress MK soldiers to be arrested. Shirish Nanabai served 10 years on Robben Island alongside Van der Jaar.
Reggie was a fantastic person, good-hearted. Anybody that had anything to discuss with him, wanted to know things, he was willing. He's never said no to anybody.
Van der Jaar also participated in the passive resistance and defiance campaigns. In 1955, he was one of the active delegates of the Congress of the People held in Kliptown, a forum where the Freedom Charter was initiated.
Get behind Rugby World Cup 2015 on SABC.
This is Media Monitor. Welcome back. I'm with Professor Stephen Friedman and Mr. Aldrin Sampear. Let's have a look now at the City Press's front page, and it says the Motsecha takes on SADC. While the battle lines have apparently been drawn between SADC and Angie Motsecha and her MECs over the annual national assessments, now which pupils were supposed to write this week. Well, the minister is saying that the unions should not interfere with education, but what's really going on here, gentlemen?
I struggle to understand this constant contestation between the ministry as well as the unions. There's always problems between the two. Remember, even with the former DG, Bobby O'Brien, it was the union that pushed for him to be fired.
But why
and now,
are the unions
and it seems as though that the unions wield so much power in the education system that they can actually get the ministry to postpone this assessment. And now it's been said the assessment would take place in December, but the unions are saying not a chance. That's not happening. Not in 2015. It will only be written next year.
What? Professor?
Well, I have a different view on this. I mean, I think, you know, this is the standard story we're always told. It's insane unions. Why do we have unions in education? Why they're holding the country to ransom? To me, the issue is this, okay? There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of teachers in this country. They are entitled to a voice. They're entitled to representation. They're entitled to respect. One of the weirdest things about current South Africa is that everybody says that education is important and everybody is nasty to teachers. You can't do both at the same time and expect people to rush into teaching with great enthusiasm if you're always rude about teachers. I don't think the teachers' union is blameless. I think that very often they push it very much. But if you speak to education specialists, they will tell you that very often the way in which teachers are treated by the education system creates this situation. So if you look at the annual national assessment, for example, I don't think anybody reasonable would deny that it's a good idea. We need that assessment. It's good for the education system. But then you have to go a bit deeper than this, and you have to say, how is this negotiated with the trade unions? Were teachers actually brought along with this? I would be surprised, because I know quite a bit about outcomes-based education, and outcomes-based education relies very much on teachers, and teachers have totally been ignored in that system. So I think that what this is telling us is a constant problem in which the negotiation relationship between the department and the teachers is broken. And you can't blame just one side for a broken relationship.
But it shouldn't affect the education, Professor, is what we're saying here.
Well, it does affect education because teachers are human beings. It's their profession. And yes, you know, there are cases of abuse. We're not denying that. On the other hand, as I say, if you continually hammer a person over the head who's conducting a critical national function, and then you expect them to be full of reasonableness, this is not a result of one or two exchanges between this particular minister and SADC. It's been going on for years. It's a very unproductive relationship, and it has to be sorted out by both sides. We have to send out very clear signals that teachers who do their job are national heroes and heroines, which they are to a certain extent, and that's not being done.
Very quickly, Aldrin.
Well, geez, I don't know. I disagree a bit on this one, because what we need to understand is what's the purpose of these ANAs. The purpose of the ANAs is to assess where the pupils are in terms of the level of education and where the teachers are. But what these ANAs have done constantly is that they've exposed that some teachers don't even understand the subject matter. And that's when we need to deal with that. If you get a result at the end of, let's say, probably the beginning of next year, then you know where to start. This is where the problem is. These are where the problems are lying. So how do we sort it out going forward so that we get into that realm of teacher training that happens constantly, and it doesn't happen only after 2 years or something like that.
Yeah, but are unqualified teachers simply the response of a few individuals, or is it not what has been happening in the education system for 30, 40 years? And that's
But
the
they're
point
trying
that
to
I'm
fix
making.
that. But they're trying to fix that with the analyst.
You don't try to fix it by treating with contempt your frontline people who have to make education work.
I honestly don't see Annas as treating teachers with this contempt.
No, the system, an assessment doesn't treat this, but you must have a look at the way in which the department interacts with teachers. I really think that journalists in this country need to look at both sides of the story. Go down there, investigate, and see the way teachers are treated. And I think you'll see that it's not as straightforward an issue as a lot of people in the media feel it.
Professor, let's leave those questions to the people at home to try and deal with. But thank you for that response. Let's now have a look at the Sunday Independent. On the front page, it says, the Hawks rogue unit exposed. Now, in an interesting turn of events, once again, the Hawks has apparently been operating a secret rogue unit that is involved in FLAC plus type operations linked to the torturing as well as the illegal rendition of prisoners. When is the story going to break? What is happening in that story, Aldrin? Please tell me.
First, it was the illegal rendition of Zimbabweans, and now it's the legal rendition of Congolese. I really don't understand what's happening within the Hawks. If there's any truth to this story, if you look, for instance, at what has been happening right now at the Hawks with the appointment of Ben Intlemeza and that comment from the judge saying that this person is dishonest, and yet this person gets to be at the helm of the Hawks, and then you ask yourself, would these allegations of a rogue unit, would it be investigated thoroughly, and would heads roll eventually? Because we saw what happened with Sabc. He's been fired. What's going to happen with the rogue unit itself?
Professor, what do you think?
Look, I think what they call in the trade the backstory. I think the backstory here is that our security agencies are very seriously factionalized, which means that there are various factions competing with each other. And we see this in the media all the time because the factions leak things to the media about the other factions, which means that when one reads these reports, one never knows whether they're really serving the public or they're an attempt to serve factional interests. There is, however, only one solution. There's only one way we get to the bottom of these things. They have to be fully investigated. We have to have a public process in which we get to the bottom of this. Because I think if you remember when there were allegations floating around years ago about the National Director of Public Prosecutions, the then President appointed a public commission. And I think that was a very important step because it meant that we, the public, could see every day the evidence being weighed. And I think the same thing has to be done with the security services. I mean, I agree, if these allegations are true, it's scandalous, but we need to know whether they're true, and we can only do that with a public process.
Yeah, and then we can stop whispering untruths behind, people's backs. Let's now have a look at page 6 of the same paper there. Focus on ISIS and 78 million rand airport probe. Now, SARS, the Hawks, as well as the intelligence services are all questioning if there was indeed 78 million rand cash that was confiscated at OR Tambo on its way to fund, wait for it, international organizations linked to terror. Now, 5 individuals were detained in relation to the matter, and apparently they were bound for Dubai. So what's the truth here? There are no definitive answers in this story either.
Most definitely. Aldrin. Quite interesting, though, that the front page is about the rogue unit within the Hawks, and then you have that story as a page 5, where we speak about the great work that the Hawks have been doing.
Well, exactly. No, that's precisely my point. Because, I mean, just to illustrate what I said about the previous thing, for heaven's sake, if you can't agree on whether 78 million rand was confiscated or not, then this has got nothing to do with the truth. This has got to do with factions trying to know. It's a very basic fact. Either 78 was confiscated or it wasn't confiscated. So, that's another way of fighting the war. And maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. But, there's a very interesting angle to this. And that is that when there was a national controversy about the Protection of State Information Bill, everybody got the bill wrong, or most people got the bill wrong. They said it was about corruption. It was never about corruption. The bill was about protecting the security forces. And this is an indication of why we shouldn't protect security forces. Yes, there are some things in intelligence which have to remain secret. But if we, the public, are not aware of what the security forces are doing, if we can't monitor them, if our members of parliament can't monitor them, then this kind of thing just carries on all the time. And then you have these stories which may be true, they may be smears. And these are obviously very serious issues. They affect the country in a very direct way.
But then shouldn't we blame the media and their sometimes misleading headlines, Aldrin?
How so? How so? Touche.
No, I'm never averse to blaming the media, but you know, the point is that they're continually leaked in this way. Look, I think where some people in the media could be blamed is the old thing about, you know, you're supposed to hear both sides.
Absolutely, and sometimes the headlines are so sensationalized.
Well, exactly.
Absolutely, we don't get the gist of the story.
Says.
All right, let's leave it there, gentlemen. Media, you also took blame in this. After the break, we discuss the newsmakers of the week. Please don't go anywhere.
It's for the first time that the industry is organized in this fashion. When the president came to office in 2009, one of the issues he raised with the industry is that they are not organized. So it's difficult to deal with the industry in that fashion.
One of the main issues is transformation. We have a lot of monopoly that we have to go against within. Exploitation is one of them as well. There are a lot of things that we have to go through.
And we truly appreciate the fact that we have been afforded this opportunity, because for the longest time artists have been wanting to say something and not really getting where they want to be and articulating it clearly. But when you have a body like this, then you know that at least I've got a home, we've got an umbrella home where all artists can feel that they belong.
We're back here on Africa's News Lead, and you can air your views on our topics today. Find us on Twitter at SA Media Monitor. It is time now for the stories of the week, starting right here at home, where a fourth teenager survived the necklace after an angry mob from Etwata, east of Johannesburg, went on a rampage to root out gangsterism in the community. Now, this comes a few days after 3 other teenagers were killed in a similar fashion. Panel, what's going on? I mean, incidents of this nature are a serious indictment to the way police deal with mob justice, and it's going to go back to how the police dealt with those people.
I just quickly want to start off with the issue around gangsterism. Cape Town's obviously facing a similar situation where you heard the Premier calling on the national government to bring in the National Defence Force to come and help out here. And then about a year or 2 ago, while I was still working for another radio station, it was a Sunday that community members in Kagiso necklaced, I think it was about four members who they, four residents who they thought were gangsters, were part of gangsters, and they set them alight. And now we find the same thing happening again, but now this time in eThwathwa. And you ask yourself, is vigilantism what communities really feel they should be relying on, because they feel like government is not coming to the party, the police is not coming to the party, and based on that, it's time that we take matters into our own hands.
Professor.
Look, this is, Aldrin saying it, he reported on it 2 years ago. This has been going on for a long time, and people who research on the criminal justice system have been warning about this for a long time. The problem, as you suggest, I mean, it's a very deep problem, but it's clear what's going on. People don't trust the justice system. At the top of our society, among the politicians and the senior business people, the justice system works very well for them and they trust it. But if you look at, it's not only these awful incidents of violence. We see constantly when there's some crime in a community and somebody is arrested for the crime, people immediately arrive at the courtroom, they demand that the person is convicted immediately. They don't want to hear the evidence, etc. And obviously we can blame people for a certain extent because we're trying to encourage the rule of law, but also, the authorities who run the criminal justice system need to look at this. If people are so alienated from the system that they simply are cynical about it, they simply assume the only way you can protect yourself is with horrific incidents like this. I agree that the police need to look at the way in which they handle vigilantism, but I think that the police need to look very seriously at the way in which they handle crime in this country at the grassroots, because there's always the feeling that the bad guys get away with it because the police are either incompetent or the police are corrupt, etc. Now, whether those perceptions are true or not, they really have to be confronted here.
Professor, the police are also scared for their lives when it comes to these type of situations.
And just quickly on the issue around understanding the justice system is that what you find, for instance, is that let's say somebody is accused of rape. You have the ANC Women's League or some organizations who go marching or protesting outside the court, and then they demand that that person not be given bail. And that creates the perception that when somebody is granted bail, that automatically means that person is innocent. And that's the reason why some people then decide that, you know what, let's take matters into our own hands, because they don't understand how the criminal justice system works or how the judicial system works. And they have to understand that the magistrates and the judges rely on what's in the book of law and what evidence is brought in front of the court.
No, but you can't expect, you see, my point is, I agree with your broad point. If the elite in the society, if the people who are the opinion formers are already convicting people before they're tried, you can't blame people at the grassroots for not understanding how the system works. They don't understand how the system works because they haven't been told how the system works by the opinion leaders in the society, and that's what creates the problem.
All right, gentlemen, let's leave it there on that. Let's move on to our next story now. Aurora mine workers will have to wait a bit longer to get compensated. Directors of the liquidated mine are appealing the Pretoria High Court ruling at the Supreme Court of Appeal that they are personally liable for the destruction of the mine. And Trade Union Solidarity, on the other hand, wants 28,000 rand per miner out of court settlement with the directors. I want to hear your views on this, gentlemen. Professor, let's start with
from a worker's point of view, it's obviously incredibly distressing, and one needs to recognize that. On the other hand, I think we're making progress on this thing. What we had this week was that the directors tried to use the courts to prevent to absolve themselves of personal responsibility for leaving people destitute, and they failed. Now, you can get frustrated and you can say, but they can now go to this appeal and that appeal and the other appeal, etc. And I understand that from a worker's point of view. But once again, we're trying to build a society in which the law is respected, in which the law works. So as horrific as this is, you can't deny people their right to go to court. What we should look at in the cases like these, which has been around for a long time, is how slow the process is. So instead of saying, well, why are these people allowed to appeal, why isn't the appeal heard within 2 weeks so that people can get some sort of movement, so that people, if in fact what has been, if what is found so far is upheld by the courts, then workers will have to be compensated by the directors. And I think that the object should be to make that resolved as quickly as possible. If they are liable, they should have to pay as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, Prof. And we'll talk about it in our next story. Aldrin, I want to just hear your points quickly on this one.
Well, I think what this Aurora case also does, that it exposes what happens within unions as well. You need to understand at some point all these mine workers were paying union fees. And you ask yourself that, do the unions have to move to a point where they actually have a fund available that looks after workers who faces such problems, for instance, who find themselves not having an income? I remember being in Orkney speaking to one of the workers there who were affected by this Aurora case, and he said that he hasn't been able to go home for the past 5 years. And that's because he feels embarrassed to go home. You go home, you've left home, you told your family that I'm going to go and get work and I'm going to come back with money. And all of a sudden, 5 years later, you haven't been able to go home because you haven't lived up to your promise. And it's not because of your own fault, but it's because of faults of others, external factors which you don't have control over.
Aldrin, do you know what that leads to? Let's have a look at our next story. While there's no end in sight to the ongoing Zamazama's war, in the past few days, 11 illegal miners suffocated to death in an unused mine shaft in Benoni. Last week, 19 Zamazamas lost their lives in a tug-of-war with rival gangs in Springs. Police have formed a task team in a bid to stop illegal mining, which is usually followed by deadly shootings. Professor, back to your earlier point, if these people were paid quickly and they could actually leave, some of the miners are actually staying at the premises of that unused mine, which leads to illegal mining.
Well, sure. And if you don't have a situation where you look after working people, this kind of thing happens. And I take the point. I mean, many people have justifiably criticized the unions. They're sitting on fairly large amounts of money. They should have strike funds. They should have unemployment funds. But at the same time, you know, we need to understand that business people in this country need to be responsible. They need to be socially responsible. They need to be, and a lot are. But when situations like this happen, and then you have people saying, oh no, well, these people are just lawless, etc. Yes, of course we need to stop these things happening. But if you don't deal with the underlying poverty in the society, and you don't deal with the underlying inequality in the society, these things come to haunt us. And yes, the unions have a role to play, government has a role to play, but so does business. And I think that we need to spread the responsibility through all the major players.
There needs to be more
the sad thing about these disused mines is that all of a sudden when a company has left, they just leave it at that. They don't look after the mine, they don't shut down the mine. And right now in Grootvlei, for instance, I remember one of the companies there saying that it's not their responsibility as a company to look after the mine because they've said they're not part of that operation anymore. And it is supposed to be the law enforcers who are supposed to make sure that those miners don't go underground. But if those miners do go underground, it is at their own risk.
You know, we've always asked that question, and Professor,
totally
I asked you this question, that isn't there a clause when government gives the mining certificates to say, when you close shop, these are the things that you also need to do when you leave?
Absolutely. There's a lot to be done there. I mean, this is one example. I've written recently about the fact, look, we are going to lose quite a lot of jobs on the mines. That doesn't have to be a disaster. If something is put in place to ensure that those people who lose their jobs on the mines can work productively afterwards. And the mining companies could contribute to that. And quite frankly, a company which says that the mine shaft from which it made massive profits is not its responsibility when the profits stopped is not a responsible company. And yes, those companies have mining licenses which are handed out by the government, and it should be part of that process that you look after the mine shaft.
Thank you so much, Professor. We'll leave it there. Well, we're going to take a quick ad break, and after that, the judiciary has once again maintained its independence. Those details are coming up after the break.
This stage is very crucial because should we fail to agree here, the next stage would be a strike, and I don't think there's any party that is interested in a strike. But if the employers force us that way, there's nothing else we can do.
We were, having a mandate from our members to reject the 1,000 rand.
which was previously offered. So anything which is less than 1,000 or even 1,000 rand that they will bring back to the table will not be accepted.
Welcome back. Joining me in studio to monitor the media is Professor Stephen Friedman and Aldrin Sampear. Now, the ruling in the Omar al-Bashir case has been hailed as a victory to the independence of the judiciary. This following Judge Hans Fabricius's dismissal of government's application for leave to appeal against the court's ruling regarding Omar al-Bashir's departure from South Africa. Ooh, gentlemen, I want to hear your views on this. What do you think? Professor, let's start with you.
Well, you know, I've been writing quite a lot about this. I'm not sure that it's a great victory for the independence of the judiciary to have a case in which everybody cheers and judges hand down judgments which are not ever going to be implemented. And they're not ever going to be implemented because they're totally out of touch with political reality. I've made the point many times, okay, Robert Mugabe is the law. There's an order in America which says that Robert Mugabe is not allowed into America. He can go whenever he likes to the United Nations, and they will not arrest him because that's the way international law works. That's the way the international system works. Mugabe is also, incidentally, not allowed to go to Europe. He goes into the Vatican, he gets to see the Pope. They say, well, the Vatican's not a member of the EU, but the Vatican doesn't have an airport. So how does he get in and out? He gets into the point that I'm making is whatever you think of Omar al-Bashir, a court order telling a government to arrest a sitting head of state who's here for a summit is not going to be implemented by any country on the planet. And one has to ask whether it's really fostering independence and respect for the judiciary to put judges in a position where they have to issue orders which everybody knows are never going to be implemented. I don't blame the judges so much as I blame the NGOs who bring these cases, you know, because they're supposed to be protecting the rule of law. Well, if you're protecting the rule of law, why place judges in a position where they have to hand out judgments which they can't implement and which nobody is going to implement? So I don't think it's a victory for independence of the judiciary. I think it's a setback.
All right, well, it's time for an update of all local and all global stories now. Let's have a look at them. Starting in Burkina Faso, where a West African delegation mediating in Burkina Faso after the coup last week says there has been a breakthrough and hinted the transitional government could return. Gentlemen, very interesting developments coming out of Burkina Faso, but now the EU's even threatened sanctions if the violence continues.
You know, the sad thing about Africa, but what I really like is that we've moved away from the coups. So it seems. And then after what has been perceived as a peaceful election, all of a sudden there's a coup. And you ask yourself, when we speak about the development of the continent as well as attracting foreign direct investment, how do you do that when you have a political system that's unstable? We have a political environment that's not conducive for foreign direct investment, because now you come into a country and you make these investments and all of a sudden there are bombs exploding everywhere and all of a sudden you don't know who the president is.
I've never known that to worry foreign investors in the past, but that's another issue. I used to be told at the height of the Nigerian military dictatorship. I used to be told by business people who did business in Nigeria what a wonderful person the dictator was, because he was looking after their business. But no, let's get serious about this. Look, I'm very much a glass half full person on this issue. Obviously, coups are appalling. Obviously, this coup has to be stopped. I think we're making progress as a continent. Bear in mind 2 points. First of all, this is the first coup in a very long time. The second one is, I don't think it's insignificant that the AU have moved in straight away. The AU was saying, look, if you remain in government, we are throwing you out of the AU, we are imposing sanctions, and they are going to the negotiating table with that in mind. It's obviously a huge test. I mean, if this is allowed to stand, it would be a huge setback for Africa. But I'm reasonably confident that what's going to happen at the end of this is that they're going to get the message from the AU and they're going to stand down. And I think that that will be a huge plus, because it will send a message to anybody else who has the same idea, that if you try this, you're going to be thrown out of the AU, you're going to be put under pressure. And I think it's a very important test for democracy, but I think that we will come through the test as a continent.
All right. Well, Professor is very, very, futuristic in his views about that. Now, political opposition parties in Zimbabwe are calling for President Robert Mugabe to step down for reading an incorrect speech during the State of His Nation address. Let's take a look at that clip.
Out to embarrass the president? No. But how to say, if a whole head of state, who is not a person, by the way, who is an institution, according to my debate, can come and make such a mistake, 30 minutes of reading a fake speech, it cannot be allowed. And I'm saying heads must roll.
Guys.
I doubt that it would be Robert Mugabe's head that would roll.
Whose head should roll, Aldrin?
If Robert Mugabe wouldn't step down after sanctions against the country, why would he step down for reading an incorrect speech?
Well, it raises obvious questions about how in control he. If you cannot notice as head of state that you're reading a speech that you read a couple of weeks ago, then perhaps you aren't as much in control as you think you are. I guess that's what they're trying to say.
All right, well, it is time to take a very quick ad break, and we'll be back with more Media Monitor. All right, we're not going to that ad break now. Panel, let's have a look at what people on Twitter have sent us and see what you've said on the topics we've been discussing today. Msengane says so-called necklace murders are a particularly evil practice. They show the perverse nature of the perpetrators. Is this a better life? At Aggie R01 says, I have to say communities are held hostage by these criminals, although I don't agree with mob justice. Now, the purist of Natal says it could count every cent these greedy folks have wasted. On this case, all Aurora workers would have been paid handsomely. And of course, Dumisani Mashaba says this activity falls under informal business. The government purpose to legalize it. Hashtag the Zamazamas. Thank you very much. All right, panel, before we go, what do you think will be making news headlines this week? Aldrin, what will you be reporting about this week? Is Oscar coming out on parole? Quickly, gentlemen.
Is Oscar coming out? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But that will only happen in the next 2 weeks, that when the review panel will listen into that case. And the other issue is probably what happened yesterday with the ANC discussion around defamation being decriminalized. That's really interesting, I think.
Professor?
Well, I think that, as you know, seeing that I'm always on about how we are part of a continent, I think the way how things develop in Burkina Faso will be very important over the next week. I agree with Aldrin. I think this criminal defamation issue is a very interesting development, given that we're always told that the noose is tightening around the media. This seems to be an attempt to loosen the noose, which I think everybody would welcome. And let's see whether these spy versus spy revelations that we're reading about get traction, because I think they will. I think people will pick up on these allegations about the Hawks, and I think they will be in the news over the next
What
week.
about the ANA dispute? Do you think that is going to be resolved before they actually have to start doing that?
No, I think that's obviously very important, and that will be ongoing. I'm simply saying that I think they need to try to negotiate in good faith. I think we do need the ANAs. I don't think anybody's denying that. But let's try and get there in a way in which it doesn't make teachers feel that they're being dumped on.
You know, the professors stood, up for the teachers all this hour. Thank you so much, Professor, and of course, Mr. Sampear, for joining us this morning. This has been a live broadcast from SABC Studios here in Auckland Park. Thank you for joining us. You can email us on mediamonitor@sabc.co.za or find us on Twitter @SAMediaMonitor. Now, in the spirit of Heritage Month, we are playing out with the unveiling of 55 Liberation Icons visuals. For me, Alicia, Jali, and the rest of the team, have a good day and stay blessed.